The World Trade Organization is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. Its main function is to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. Lately, there has been trade contentions on grounds of interest between the United States of America and China, putting the World Trade Organization in the eye of the storm. This is visibly showing up among candidates jostling for the position of Director General of the World Trade Organization. Whose interests will the new DG of WTO play upon election? How will that sustain the essence of the World Trade Organization in dealing with global rules of trade among nations amid comparative advantage? On the program, we will be focusing on Africa rearing for the office of the Director General of the World Trade Organization, WTO. My guest is His Excellency Ambassador Usman Sarki, a career diplomat who has served Nigeria in many fronts, including Nigeria's Deputy Permanent Representatives at the United Nations in New York. He is currently a directing staff at the Nigeria Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Kuru, Jos. The program continues. Stop shortly. Stay with us. Let's begin with an assessment of WTO, 1995 to date.
Yes.
If WTO is responsible for midwifing and concluding on trade arrangement between nations, between blocks, regional blocks, global blocks, and what have you, would you say they have been successful so far?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to your program. It's a pleasure always, to speak to you and to speak to very interesting subjects that you come up with. This issue, too, is very important for the health of the world in terms of ensuring prosperity, peace, and, facilitation of global relationships. The World Trade Organization, WTO, as you know, as you said, was established in 1995, which succeeded the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, as a regulatory body, as a facilitation body, and also as a rules-based international organization to direct the conduct of global trade. Between 1995 and to date, the WTO has succeeded in stabilizing the global trading environment, in introducing normative processes, rules of conduct for countries, for member states in particular to observe, and for leveling the playing field, of trade, whereby not only the rich, powerful, and industrialized countries could dominate trade, but also it gives a fair chance to developing countries and least developing countries, LDCs, to partake in global trade. That is one. Secondly, the WTO has succeeded in building the capacity of many developing countries to negotiate preferential trade agreements and to negotiate beneficial trade agreements, either bilaterally or multilaterally. For instance, the African bloc, in the WTO, negotiating with the European bloc in terms of the Cotonou agreements, for instance, and also the Pacific, the Africa-Pacific Caribbean, the APC trade agreements, which are done outside the WTO, but the mechanisms of the WTO informed, these processes so that that in the developing countries could observe issues like the application of flexibilities in the international intellectual property rights system, the taking advantage of certain legal and technical loopholes, in the global trade agreements and so forth. So the WTA has institutionalized capacities and also leveled the environment for the international, trade, to take place within a conducive, peaceful, predictable, free, and sustainable environment.
Okay. Let's look at a conformity with the issue we're looking at.
Yes.
Africa rearing for the office of Director General of the World Trade Organization.
Yes.
Now, can you give us a a brief picture of what it looks like,
Yes.
Africa, and maybe narrow down to the sub-regional level, ECOWAS?
Well, for me, on the assessment, on the balance, if we have an equal and fair and balanced and level playing field, we stand a very good chance of getting into the leadership of the WTO. The candidate we presented is an extremely able, qualified, and very amiable candidate who can actually, work in the system and bring stability to the WTO. Nigeria's prestige, Nigeria's image, and Nigeria's weight in Africa will also help in advancing the candidature that we have put forward. Already, we have got the endorsement of our economic bloc, our regional economic bloc, ECOWAS, and that is in keeping with the structure of candidacy. You have to go to the ECOWAS first, clear with the candidatures committee, and then they go to the AU. And there you go and convince the African bloc.
I know the bigger you go, the more competitive it becomes.
But today I think we have only one competitor, I think Egypt. So we will be able to manage that one if we play our diplomacy dexterously and we do our advocacy very well. The candidatures committee in Addis Ababa will sit down, the permanent representatives and others, to look at the credentials of the countries and put it in the balance of representation regionally. And then inform the whole world, the member states of the WTO, that Africa's candidate is so and so. So in that way, you already have the entire African continent behind you. Then you can now go and negotiate with other regional blocs. And that is where the trick lies in terms of getting the endorsement of other regional blocs. But more importantly, the big elephant in the room, countries like the United States.
That's not coming now.
Okay,
but if you go through the net avalanche of information available regarding this campaign for the DGC of WTO,
yes.
the trade war between China and the United States is playing a major role in the campaigns. So now we ask, if this is the issue, what will be the interest of the new DG? Is it going to play good global, or play China, or play US?
No, under every arrangement, when you become an international civil servant, you do not represent your country, you do not represent your region, you represent everybody. So we expect, and Dr. Okonjo-Iweala knows, that she is going to be neutral. She will be an arbiter, an umpire, a referee, a disinterested person who will bring the different sides together to reconcile them within the basis of the rules of the WTO. So within the framework of agreed negotiation strategies. So her role is to keep the secretariat, the WTO, engaged and relevant in the processes of dispute settlement. But there are actually panel of judges, experts, who advise the member states, who advise the ministerial conference, who advise the governing council, who advise the secretariat in terms of the procedure and processes of settlement of dispute. So in that way, I don't think any country will expect the Director General to take their side. So she will come into office as a neutral person, as a disinterested person, as a facilitator, as an umpire, to give direction to the way how the rules of the WTO will be applied. And you have said in your opening remarks that the WTO offers a rules-based system for international trade. And I think we have to operate within that rules-based system. So you cannot be a maverick as a member state to insist that everything must go according to your dictates or wishes. That is not possible. And we expect that enlightened self-interest and the long-term interests of the countries involved, particularly that of the United States and China, will dictate and inform them that they need to settle their differences amicably, immediately, so that it does not lead to longer-term ramifications like downturn in global trade, depression, the blocking of investment flows and other things.
Okay. Can we also look at the slant of the blocs?
Yes.
Swing the elections. For instance, the Asian bloc is there.
Yeah.
And other blocs you know very well.
Yeah.
And now looking at it critically that the Asian bloc is not likely to contest in this race.
Yeah.
Where are they likely to sway to? Is it Africa or where?
No, I think, the Asian bloc will swing towards Africa because there is a lot of interest, of the Asian countries in Africa. China, as you know, has a lot of say. In fact, outside Africa, China's relevance diminishes. And the more China engages with Africa, the more its relevance globally increases in terms of the playing field it has to demonstrate its capacity, power, and riches.
Down to Africa.
Yes, narrowing down to
Egypt and Nigeria. Where do you think they will tilt to?
Well, I think, they have a lot of stake in Nigeria, a lot of interest. And that's why I said if we play our diplomacy dexterously, if we don't go the usual Nigerian way of taking things in our stride in a lackadaisical manner, but we become very focused, very determined and highly organized, we are going to take this away from Egypt. The Asian bloc at the moment does not have any interest in they haven't presented a candidate. So whichever candidate emerges in terms of the prospects of winning and the credentials of that, that's what they will look at. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala comes with a very long, credential in terms of antecedents, in terms of her experience, in terms of the credibility she will bring into the office. She will bring a number of perspectives. People have not talked or written about it, but I think it's important for us to point out. First of all, she will bring the African perspective, whereby we don't have enemies in the world. Everybody is our friend. So she will go there as the friend of everybody. America, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all the countries of the world, Brazil, everybody. Secondly, she will bring the developing countries perspective. 2/3 of the membership of the WTO consists of developing countries and LDCs, least developed countries. So their perspectives should matter considerably. And fourthly, she is bringing a gender perspective. It's very important, for women, to participate in global governance, to lead international institutions like the WTO, and to bring this deft touch in terms of sympathies, in terms of accommodation, in terms of not showing power, but playing power to bring people together. And she's bringing an academic background, who she will analyze things. She will look at things from a scholarly perspective and give advice from very sound basis. And don't forget, she was part of the World Bank, which is another global institution dealing with finance and development. She has. And internally, in her own country, she was a Minister of Finance, and many people forget that she was briefly Minister of Foreign Affairs. So she has a lot of background, very solid credential to bring into office. And I think if you go to the WTO website to read the biography of all the other candidates, hers is far richer, if I may say so, than those other candidates. So objectively, based on experience, qualifications, and expectations to bring into the office, she stands a very good chance of getting elected. But like I said, we have to organize our diplomacy. The focus and energy of the Nigerian government must now be singularly dedicated to this very, very important project. One concern I have is that many embassies are now, I think, devoid of ambassadors. We have recalled ambassadors rather precipitately and left the missions in the hands of relatively junior officials. So I don't know how the canvassing of the candidates will be done in countries where we don't have ambassadors. The second aspect is I don't know who will lead the national campaign team, whether it's going to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Geoffrey Onyema, or another minister. But the rest of the world will expect that it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs who will conduct the global campaign. And I hope the government gives that task to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Foreign Affairs so that we do not create multiplicity of avenues for the campaign. And I think if we do that and we focus on the ball, our eyes on the ball, on the objective, we will do a very jolly good showing and give a run for everybody's money, for their money, in this venture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of pending issues. For instance, EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, which has been in the can for a very long time. Nigeria, from the ECOWAS end, has not signed EPA up to now.
Yeah.
For one reason, that Nigeria, the EPA is already in violation of the treaty establishing WTO. Now, what are the chances that if an African emerges or a Nigerian emerges, there could be a turnaround?
Well, for me, it will take some time, or it becomes even difficult with the adoption of the Continental African Free Trade Agreement, for instance. African governments will concentrate more on the regional trade agreement to build it up from scratch, make it institutionalized, and make it relevant. So an African WTO Director General may not spend too much time on trying to revive the EPA, because she is now in the WTO system, and she will not want to bring about a parallel organization or institution or procedure or process that may be seen to be conflicting with provisions of the WTO. She will concentrate on giving advice to African countries on how to harmonize relationship, harmonize procedures and processes with the WTO, so that the CAFTA will not violate in its very essence and operations the provisions of the WTO, to which we are all members. She will advise on how efficacious and effective the CAFTA will be in terms of consolidating the African economies, in terms of facilitating trade within the continent, breaking barriers, and also causing about consolidation of capital and investment.
The lens of globalization, WTO, global competitiveness, multilateralism.
Yes.
Where lies Africa? Where can we ever catch up?
Now, in terms of catching up, I think we shouldn't bother about catching up, but how can we be more competitive? That is what we should do. But if catching up, if we want to catch up with who? Okay. You ask yourself, catching up with who? With America, with China, with Japan, or with Korea, or what? Really But the thing is, let us fix our own objectives, our own bar, our own yardsticks, and try to meet them.
For instance, the focus of driving force of India today, up to now, is looking up to China. How do we meet up with China?
Yes.
So if in Africa, for instance, as a bloc, as a continent, can we pick up a particular maybe climb in, say, Asia or Europe? Let's look at this as a yardstick to meet up. Because whatever India is doing now in Southeast Asia, they see China as their target to meet up.
Well, in terms of Africa, because of the variations in regional variations and country variations, 53 or 54 member states, they cannot all be considered as a uniform. But we have the African Union Agenda 2063.
Absolutely.
That can give us the normative basis and also the practical basis and also the bar, to really aspire to reach in terms of commitment. But that will begin at the national level. Countries like Nigeria, how determined are we to implement the provisions of the Agenda 2063 to work towards that? Globally, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs. How are we working to meet those, even to exceed them? So I think for me, those are the things we should look up to, not to look at what other countries are doing. Their own political system are different from ours. the way they organize themselves, even the mental outlook and cultural, institutions and advantages they bring to bear on their development are different from ours. So we have to go back to the drawing board in terms of how we organize our trading system, our economic system, our state structure. Because if you don't have a strong state structure, you don't have offices, and you don't have the right officers in place, no matter what you do, you will always lag behind, because the organic link between policy, between programs and implementation are not there. So you have to produce a composite structure of state and institutions to drive your development needs. Every ministry, every department, every agency must have an objective, must have the wherewithal, the resources, and must have the political push, the gendarme behind it, to push it towards that goal.
Okay.
If that is not done, then it will just be a gyration of people just, dancing about, on stage, and at the end of it all, everybody parks their thing and goes back home. The following day they go through the same process without any results, and go back. And once you waste time on this effortless struggle or aimless struggles, then the issue of catching up will never rise. You will never catch up. You have to be organized, you have to be focused and disciplined to devote the entire will of the state towards that objective before you can make it.
But finally, before I let you go,
Yeah.
I agreed Nigeria's foreign policy stance has
Yeah.
always been Afrocentric, as much as they do other things.
Yeah.
Now, you've been there up to the position of deputy permanent rep of Nigeria at United Nations in New York. Currently, Nigeria is chairing the 74th, or is at the presidency of the 74th United Nations General Assembly. Nigeria is at the helm of affairs at the African Development Bank, and a couple of other institutions, global institutions, I cannot remember right now.
The Civil Aviation ICAO.
Absolutely.
Or something.
Okay. Right now, we are like almost 80% through to the position of the Director General of WTO.
Yeah.
Now, looking at this scenario, one sentence, where lies the future of Nigeria in the next maybe 5 years globally?
Well, build the capacity of your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Build the capacity of complementary institutions like NIPS, the Nigeria Institute for International Affairs, your research bodies, your think tanks. Build human capacity to drive your policies and your institutions. And in the next 5 years, if you do so, you are going to reap the results, number one, of precision in governance, number two, of focus in attaining objective, number three, in discipline, in strategizing and following up, your aspirations to become a medium power, state. I'm not saying we are going to be a superpower global. We don't even need to do that. But become medium power in terms of economy, in terms of socially driven, in terms of production of academic intellectual materials, in terms of researches and universities. We have to look at the collaborative structure of development. We are not going to just look at a narrow gauge, like a narrow gauge railway or train. We have to now expand tentacles everywhere, but with an objective to make Nigeria relevant and a global player, culturally, scientifically, intellectually, politically, socially, in every aspect. And that will take a combination of the state, the government, the people, and even the private sector. So 5 years down the line, we need discipline. We need to fight corruption. We need to really organize the state, the civil service, the governance of the country. We need to reduce the cost of governance and allocate resources to more productive ventures. And I think, the government has the vision to do that, the will to do that, but it needs the advice and functionaries, people who will come and implement those things. It's very important.
Yes, let's see, Ambassador Usman Sarki, always a pleasure chatting with you on this program.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a great pleasure, and looking forward to always your programs on this diplomatic outreach you have been doing, which we diplomats are following it religiously. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure.
But it is said when you rear, then you're good to go. Africa is in for it. From the analysis of my guests, we are positive that Africa may be at the helm of affairs of WTO, the first since the establishment in 1995. That's all the program. Thanks for watching.